Welcome to this short workshop in delivering key worker rider training in the context of the COVID-19 outbreak. This short course is designed to provide ATBs and rider trainers with advice and guidance on safe training protocols when training key workers. The course will cover what to do before the lesson, what to do during the lesson, personal protective equipment overview, terms and conditions, and what to do after the training session. The big question is, should we be delivering rider training on road at all at this time? As driver training makes it difficult to maintain social distancing guidelines, in general, the practice is discouraged at this time for regular pupils. Though we do acknowledge rider trainers find it easier to maintain social distancing, the training of non-key worker pupils is not advisable at the moment. However, to ensure key workers who do need to acquire new licences or develop their occupational driving ability are safe and competent, we must ensure they receive adequate training. By trying to mitigate one public health risk, we can't cause another public health risk of increased RTCs and more pressure on the NHS frontline by not having these pupils adequately trained. For that reason, some in-vehicle training is taking place on our roads at this moment in time. There may be a variety of reasons for driver training, which could include licence acquisition or developing someone's occupational driver training experience, skill and ability. Not all training currently is about acquiring a new licence in a new category. Training may also be required to enable workers to drive a different vehicle but within the same licence category. A good example of this being delivery vehicles for online groceries. You should make every attempt to validate that the pupils who are approaching you for training are indeed key workers with essential need to drive for work or ride for work. You should not be delivering rider training at this time unless you have validated the pupil is a key worker with that essential need. Forms of validation could include a critical worker practical test confirmed with DVSA, a letter from their employer confirming they are a key worker needing to ride for work, or a form of recognised ID, i.e. the NHS Staff Identification Badge. To join the Key Worker Driver and Rider Training Register, you will need to provide evidence in one of the forms above. Documentation can be sent as photos, uploads or scanned. There are many key or critical workers doing an amazing job in helping keep our country safe and running as normally as possible at this time. But not all of these workers will be granted a critical worker test from DVSA. A triage system is in place to assess which workers need tests most urgently, and tests will be allocated on that basis. As test slots, examiner availability and test centres are now severely limited, always check whether tests have been booked and don't assume it will be the usual times or locations. Driver trainers in particular won't be invited to sit in on the test or be involved in the debriefs for obvious reasons of limiting the amount of individuals involved in the process. There are a number of things that you need to keep on your checklist and do before each lesson. Before your student arrives for their first CBT lesson and every lesson, you should call them first and check if they have any of the symptoms of coronavirus. More details can be found at the NHS website. You should also check whether they know or have been in contact with anyone that is showing symptoms, or whether they or anyone they've been in contact with have travelled from a high-risk region in the last few days. During the call, you should also request that when they arrive on site, they wash their hands thoroughly for at least 20 seconds in line with government guidance. If they have new, clean, disposable protective gloves, they should put them on. You should only allow them to attend the lesson once you've made contact with them and you're happy with their responses. When you call the pupil before the lesson, it's helpful if you explain the safe training protocols so they know what to expect. These will include the fact that there will be no handshake or physical contact between you and the pupil, that you're going to ask them to wash their hands or use hand sanitizer on arrival and immediately before and after each lesson. You will tell them that you'll be out in the open at all times and to wear appropriate clothing, bringing their own PPE gear if possible. You will tell them the bike will be sanitised before they get on and all controls. You will advisably need to avoid using cash at this time, as it has been purported that this can spread the virus. Perhaps use other methods of payment such as bank transfer, debit card, etc. If you're happy that this pupil is in the right state of health and that they've taken the right hygiene measures, you can proceed with the lesson. But you should also explain for their comfort that you have cleaned out all the equipment they will be using and controls on the vehicle, any external contact points, with antibacterial wipes or soap, including the key itself. Once they arrive at the training centre, you should again assess whether they are well enough to start the lesson. Don't let them into the training centre straight away. If possible, meet them outside and from a distance of minimum of 2 metres, have a conversation with them to assess whether they've seen themselves. For example, are they running a high temperature or fever by the looks of it, or do they have a persistent cough that you did not notice when you spoke to them previously? If you are not 100% happy with their state of health, you should not start the lesson, and explain the lesson will have to be postponed until they've recovered. This may be a difficult conversation, but you should explain that you do not want to put yourself at risk and that you're working to protect the pupil and the wider public. Do this before every lesson you have with a key worker. All normal training protocols should still be in place, and that means you still need to check things like the pupil's licence. This can be done electronically at gov.uk/check-driving-information. You will need the last 8 characters of their driving licence and the check code from the pupil. In the training centre, ask them to hold the licence up so you can check it. Do not touch or take the licence from them. The code will be valid for 21 days and you can only use the code once. Personal protective equipment. In addition to your normal motorcycle PPE, you will need hand sanitizer. If you're not able to wash your hands with soap and water, for example, you're on the move, you will need to carry hand sanitizer. If you do not have any, then you'll need to meet the pupil at a location with hand washing facilities. If this isn't possible, you should seriously rearrange the lesson. Clean your hands as frequently as you can. You will need antibacterial wipes and spray to clean the bike down between and possibly during lessons. For example, you're stood off the bikes and doing a demonstration and you or the pupil coughs or sneezes on the equipment. It needs to be wiped down again. Again, if you do not have either of these, then the lesson should be rearranged. Have a supply of disposable bin bags on your bike for you to put all used wipes and tissues in, and the same for your pupil. They should put their own wipes and tissues in their own bag. Change the bin bag after each lesson and dispose of it responsibly. Other PPE to consider. Disposable gloves. It is a good idea to use protected disposable gloves for you and your pupils to wear during the lesson. A lot of fabric and leather gloves can still carry traces of the virus and will need to be cleaned thoroughly regardless. You will still have to clean your hands thoroughly and clean down the controls after every lesson. Please note, some people have a latex allergy, so check with your pupils first whether they're able to wear that type of disposable gloves. Other forms are available. You'll also need to change them more often than you think, and at least after every lesson. There is a still big question over whether face masks are advisable. If you can wear a face mask, we would recommend the extra precaution. If it makes you feel more comfortable during the lesson and your pupil, then the option is there, although you will already be wearing a visor offering some protection. If you're going to use face masks, make sure they're effective by using a new one frequently and disposing the old ones safely and responsibly. As a motorcycle trainer, you're already wearing a level of personal protective equipment and clothing, but make sure that you are wearing the clothing that is appropriate to the situation you are now training in, covering as much of you as possible, and you are able to clean that equipment and uniform thoroughly. Any clothing you can put in the washing machine, wash as soon as you get home from your training for the day, perhaps putting in a separate bag in the wash and washing on its own. It is essential that any PPE equipment you choose to wear does not impede yours or your pupil's vision or ability to control the bike. During the lesson content and structure should remain the same as you'd use to train any rider. You should be assessing the pupil's individual needs before they start lessons with you and designing a program which suits their needs and goals. So you need to make sure the lesson has client-centered aims and objectives and is appropriate for each pupil. It is worth bearing in mind, however, that many of the key workers you'll be training at the moment will be driving for occupational reasons, so you need to factor that in to their training so you negate the risk of occupational road risks as well. You'll need to consider the following in your practical training. Any writing should be done by the instructor. Don't share a pen or device where possible, and if you do, clean it with anti-bac wipes straight away. Training resources should be held up and not passed between the two of you. Try to avoid directly facing each other when discussing scenarios, or stand a minimum of 2 metres apart. After you've finished the lesson, and if you conduct any further worker training, you will still need to repeat some of the same processes you did at the start of the lesson. Again, remember not to shake the pupil's hand. Clean your hands with sanitizer or soap and water as soon as possible, where possible. Remind the pupil to wash their hands as soon as they can. Remember to factor in time to call your next pupil and assess their state of health to avoid a wasted journey for both you and the pupil. Repeat this process for each and every key worker pupil that you may train. It's worth noting that some of your terms and conditions may need to be altered to respond to the current crisis. It's going to be a possibility that you may have to make late cancellations due to an issue in the state of health of you or your pupil. So, for example, you may want to write into your terms and conditions that late cancellations will be made if your pupil becomes unwell and has symptoms in line with COVID-19, someone in your pupil's household is showing symptoms, your pupil believes they may have been in contact with someone showing symptoms, or if you become unwell and are showing symptoms, if anyone in your household is showing symptoms, or you believe you may have been in contact with someone showing symptoms. You have to allow for the fact that a late cancellation will have to happen in those circumstances, and your T and Cs should cover that. If you do become unwell, you will need to self-isolate in line with government guidance. It is the responsible thing to do to contact anybody you've been in contact with to tell them and for them to self-isolate too. You can find more information about this on the NHS website in the link below. As we said earlier, many of the key worker pupils coming to you at this time are going to be riding or driving in an occupational context, so you may want to factor that in to your training delivery. There are increased risks to becoming a new licensee for sure, but there are definitely increased risks for everybody who is driving in an occupational road-based role. Some of the advice about how best to mitigate the risks and the risks themselves. There's an increased risk to riders when tired, so advise your pupils that they should have a minimum of 20 minutes break before riding, and if they're feeling tired, have a caffeinated energy drink or maybe walk around in the fresh air a little before they get on the bike. If they're going to be having long shifts where they're going to be riding or driving, it's really important they take their allotted breaks to unwind a little, have a walk round if they can in between them. Thinking more so here of people like delivery drivers who are going to have a punishing schedule, they need to take a little time out in between to refresh themselves. Riding when feeling stressed can be a massive distraction and cause of accidents. So pupils need to know they have to take a bit of time to clear their head and relax a little bit before driving or riding. When riding in sociable hours, such as after dark and in the early hours of the morning, they're carrying an increased risk in their riding. So they need to ensure they've had adequate rest before riding, have a caffeinated drink, do all of the things that you need to do to wake yourselves up properly, and rest a little before they ride. They should never push themselves to continue driving or riding if they're tired. They should stop and rest. Pupils need to be self-aware. Even as trainers, we can recognise there are times when we're taking long journeys where we could zone out a little. Pupils will recollect they might have caught themselves staring or zoning out themselves. They recognise that trait, that is a sign of tiredness, so they should pull over when safe and legal and have that break. It's really important. Trainers and pupils should be aware that not only is their on-road risk increased when riding for work, their risk is going to be increased more so at this time because many of the key workers that you will be seeing are under a lot of pressure, doing long shifts and probably are tired. So these points are really important to get over in their training. Other considerations that you need to make are more around the things like scheduling of your lesson and giving yourself more time to make sure you do things like clean down the equipment in between each pupil and taking the time to be able to ring your pupils and contact them to assess their state of health. You also need to prepare yourself for the next lesson in terms of making sure your hands are washed properly for a minimum of 20 seconds with soap and water. Avoid touching your face with your hands, as well as good hand hygiene. Reducing the amount of times you touch your face is another key mitigant in the risk of contracting COVID-19. We will now ask you to complete a short test based on this lesson. This is to help us understand that you have taken on the key learnings about safe training protocols during this outbreak. You will need to score 8 out of 10 to pass, and then on successful completion of the test, we will enter your details onto the register and issue your certification. We hope you found this short course useful. Stay well and stay safe out there.